Y'all ready for this? We're ready! And we're live for another DoneJS survey meeting. This time we've got some exciting new proposals. But first I'm going to talk about the things that we had recently completed. And as some of you might know, Bitovi's been doing well lately. We've got a bunch of new client projects, and that has unfortunately meant, though, a lot of our open source team has been pulled onto client work. So the last 12 weeks we haven't done as much as we want. But of course, this is a really good thing in the long run for Bitovi and for CanJS and DoneJS and SteelJS. But it does mean we're not reporting quite as much done in these last two epochs, as we call them. So let's quickly talk about what we shipped. The first thing is we improved compatibility with Webpack for CanJS. This means if you build a CanJS application with Webpack, all of the development code is stripped out and your app will run much faster. So upgrade to CanJS 5.0 to get that. We released SteelJS 2.0, which now supports tree shaking. So, shake those trees and watch dead code just be removed. It's awesome. And then finally, we have Ilum is now being used in production in Bitovi. I would say that it is still not super, in terms of its documentation, it's not as full developed as we'd like, but there is a README and it goes through all of the major highlights. So please check that out if you're doing React work and you like CanJS's observables. So things that we've started working on, and we've been working on in the meantime, is Kevin's been working on the routing guide. He, I think, even published a little bit of that. He's going to then work on a quick rough draft of the testing guide and then follow that up with IE 11 support. We have an intern at Bitovi whose name is Thomas, and he is working with me to improve the CanJS documentation, which I'm going to help him finish and then get started. Continue working on the CanJS getting started and get video. And then finally, Matthew's
junior developer, not an intern.
Oh, a junior developer. I'm sorry. How rude of me. I'm very sorry, Thomas. If you're
we'll cut that part out.
I'll cut that out. And then DoneJS 3, Matthew is working on, which is going to include the new incremental server-side rendering and a whole bunch of other fixes, including combining CanJS 5 and DoneJS 2, or SteelJS 2, into a full DoneJS release. So that's what we've got planned. Now on to you, our amazing, extremely attractive, wonderful community member. It is on to you telling us what issues and tasks that you would like us most to work on. So we are going to, where's the proposals? So we're going to first go through the proposals new in this survey, and then talk about, also go over real quickly old ones that are going to be in the survey again. So Matthew, you want to take it away?
Yeah, we have 5 new proposals.
Mm-hmm.
The first proposal, yeah, you can mute yourself. The first proposal is about the DoneJS CLI and transitioning away from the DoneJS CLI into using NPM and Yarn directly. So for a little background information, when we first started working on DoneJS, we didn't really intend to have a CLI. That was not something we necessarily wanted. We were hoping you could just do npm install DoneJS, and that would give you everything you need. But mostly because of generators, we found that it was easier for us to have our own CLI. But we really made it into kind of a very thin layer around npm. It runs your npm scripts, and it will run binaries inside of node-modules.bin folder. But since we released DoneJS, some of these features have been added to npm and Yarn directly. npm and Yarn can now run generators for you. If you do npm init DoneJS app, well, that will actually install and run a generator called create DoneJS app, and that can work exactly like our DoneJS add app does today.
Hey Matthew, are you trying to share your screen?
I am. All right. Yeah, that makes it a lot easier. Yes. Now, if you do this, npm init DoneJS app my app, it will download, create DoneJS app, and install it and run that as a generator. So that's no longer something that we need to do in DoneJS with a DoneJS CLI anymore. Additionally, there's now a tool called npx, and that comes with Node as well, and that will run your binary. So that kind of replaces this feature that we added to our DoneJS CLI. So with that being the case, there's almost no reason to have the DoneJS CLI anymore, which is nice. That means that people just need to install Node, and they don't need to install this other thing. They just install Node, and they can just start using DoneJS directly. So this proposal goes over talking about how that might work. Like, for example, we still want to be able to run DoneJS add to add new components, but we could use npx for that, because npx will, like I said, it will run stuff inside of your .bin folder. So that might be, you might have something like npx DoneJS add component. My component would be kind of the new way to do that. Another issue that we've had in DoneJS is that it's very large because it has so many features. So over time, what we've done is we've moved some of the things that you don't use right away, such as continuous deployment, or well, continuous deployment is a good example. We've moved that to stuff you install later. So now there's like a DoneJS add Firebase, and that will install Firebase for you. So as part of this proposal, we're kind of thinking of a new way to have kind of a lighter version of DoneJS. Have a version of DoneJS which is just Steel and CanJS, and then stuff like testing and SSR maybe gets added later. We haven't really kind of figured out how we want to do that, but that's a consideration to this, is maybe having a version of DoneJS which is a light version, and having kind of the regular DoneJS that exists today with everything included. So if you're tired of having the DoneJS CLI and you just don't want to deal with it anymore, I'd vote for this issue. And that is this one. Careful not to press stop broadcast. And we are on to Kevin to talk about scope walking.
Yep. So this proposal is to optionally turn on scope walking. So in CanJS 4.0, we removed implicit scope walking. This is much better for new users and to help you understand what your template is doing. But for anyone that's tried to upgrade to 4.0, you know it can be a lot of work to remove all of these implicit scope walking, all the implicit scope walking that exists in your application. So this proposal would allow you to opt into the old behavior, allow you to turn on implicit scope walking for a specific template or for a specific component. We don't know exactly how we're going to do this yet. There's a couple of ideas in here. One way would be to put a specific stash expression in the template that you want to turn on scope walking. So something like scope.walk, or maybe this is in a stash comment, or maybe it's a function or whatever, something like this that would allow you to turn on scope walking for that template. Another possibility is that we could do this at the component level. So when you define your component, you could do something like scope walk true or something like that that would enable scope walking for this component in its template. There are a few technical considerations that Justin's posted down here that you can read about if you're interested in this, but that is the gist of this proposal. If you want to make it easier to upgrade your app to 4.0, definitely vote for this proposal.
Thank you. Next is the logic guide. Justin.
So in short, I want to add a logic guide to CanJS.com that explains how to write define maps in a organized, testable, maintainable way. I'm not sure if most people are familiar with this, but CanJS 5 now has a technology overview, an HTML guide that talks about how to connect, has this technology overview that talks about how to interact, how to make observables interact with the DOM. That's the HTML. Routing one with how to make observables interact with your location. And another one, a service one, that talks about how to make observables interact with your service layer. But there isn't one about how to just make your observables, how to define them in a logical, consistent, testable, maintainable way. And that's what this logic guide would be. So a few discussion topics that we have in mind for this is how to programming to better organize your code.
Justin, you're cutting out a lot.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what
You're good now. You're
do.
good now.
Okay, I'm good now.
Continue, yeah.
Okay. So I'll say it briefly then. The guide will include examples of how to write your code more maintainable. And also I want to provide a structure for define maps that people can follow. There's an example one here of organizing grouping your external stateful properties, your internal stateful properties, your derived properties, your methods, and then doing side effects and side connected callback. I'd also like the DoneJS generator to write, when generating components, to generate the components with these essentially comments already written out. So it encourages people to organize their code that way. That's it for me.
Nice. Next up is Kevin to talk about the DevTools.
Right, let me share my screen. So this is a proposal to continue improving CanJS DevTools. So we released kind of the MVP of CanJS DevTools, but there's still a ton of tools and things we can add to make this a lot more usable and a lot more add a lot more value and make it easier for you to debug your application. And those are all kind of lumped together in this one proposal. So the first thing is to combine nodes in the graph, the data binding graph, into more readable values. So today, if you have a simple data binding like this, the graph that gets created looks like this. So you get all of these kind of internal scope key data and attribute observables, all these internal observables that really don't relate to your code at all. So what we want to do is combine these into one thing that kind of makes sense. So in this application, what this would show is kind of your view model, the input element, and then the thing that you added, the stash binding that kind of connects those things. So we would do this for stash bindings, and we'd also look for other places in the graph where nodes can be combined to make them more easy to understand.
It wouldn't be that big though, right, Kevin?
I think it should look just like this. I think this is a pretty good UI. Yeah, no, it wouldn't be that big. I just covered all this with the box. Cool. The next thing is to make the nodes in the graph clickable. So kind of on the same lines, if you were to click on something like this, it should take you kind of to the definition in the view model. Also input elements, if that can take you somehow to your template or to the actual elements panel in the debugger so that you can see what these things are. Right now, the graph is really just visual. You can't do anything with it. So we want to make it a little bit more functional. The next thing is to create a components tree view. This is similar to what some other DevTools have. This would kind of look like the normal elements panel if we open this up. Would look kind of like this elements panel, but would only show you components so that you would know, you'd be able to look at the tree of your components and understand your application a little bit more easily. Next one is to finish improving the view model editor. So I've done some work on this, specifically around creating this new JSON editor. This is already almost done. It has to be integrated, but it's a lot of it is done. So we're targeting something that looks more like other element or other object editors in the DevTools. So it's that, and there's some other things like figuring out what to do with promises. So you can't really edit a promise and we don't display them really correctly. Things that aren't serializable don't really work super well in the current view model editor. So we want to make that a little bit better. Things like non-writable properties, we need to figure out how to do that. Currently, if you have a property that's just a getter, the view model editor will let you try to edit it, and it'll try to update that in your view model, and it just doesn't do anything. Another thing is adding a break on change button. So in the JSON editor, if you click one of your properties in your view model, we want to be able to easily add a breakpoint when that property changes.
That's amazing. I want that.
Yeah. There's actually some, I think, some code in there that Justin uses now. Yeah, something like this basically is what we want to do, but make it so you can do that with a button. And then there's some other bugs. So there's some bugs like switching between view models breaks things. Define lists don't get serialized or updated correctly, and the queue stack is missing like the first reason, the actual like reason why the stack happened or why this change happened is missing in the DevTools panel. So we want to fix those little bugs also. So that's it. If you like CanJS DevTools but you want it to be more useful for you, vote for this, and we will continue making it awesome.
Thanks. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, the browser already has that break on events thing, you know, for like different browser events, and that's like very useful. So I really like that. Yeah. Okay, last up for new proposals is Justin to talk about some sugar for view models.
We all like sugar, but we're not sure if it's good for you or not. This proposal isn't necessarily that different from that. There's a lot of cases where you need an element on your view model. This proposal makes it so that if you put a $element, if you define a $element property that is an any type, or you could also put like HTML element or any kind of element looking constructor function type here, we will automatically, when the component is mounted, or essentially even when the view model is created, provide that element on the view model. The reason why you might want this or you need it is it's very often that I have properties now, if I'm building like a slider or something like that, I have properties that derive from the element state. Specifically for a slider, the width of the element. This also exists in something like in bitballs. I'm trying to, for a tournament, I have this little red, mute it. I have this little red bar that moves across. I need to know the dimensions of this table. I need to know where I am in the time. There's a lot of stuff that needs to figure out, like, you know, this is part of my view model, how far it's moved and how far it should be moved that I'm eventually going to use to render to the view. But I need the element to be able to figure this out. I need the player. I need the YouTube player even, and it's time to be able to figure out where this is. So having the element, it can be, you're actually doing the right thing by having the element on the view model occasionally. Currently, you have to use connected callback or something like that and create the property anyways. I'm proposing a little bit of sugar to make that easier. That's it.
All right. Don't go too far, Justin. Well, so that's it for all the new stuff. So now we're going to do somewhat of a lightning round where we go kind of quickly through our previous survey items and just to kind of refresh if you haven't, maybe you didn't do the last survey. So here you go. Justin, you're up with type checking on CanDefine.
So CanJS supports type coercion, but not type checking. Type checking would mean that if someone tries to set a value that your property doesn't accept, it would throw an error. And this can be arguably, I think, is arguably more useful than type coercion. Especially now that CanJS supports converters, you should be using converters to read from the DOM and convert values to numbers or to Booleans or whatever you want into your view model. So it's nice if your view model can totally just avoid getting values that it doesn't expect or the wrong type. That should be kind of handled in the view, ideally, with converters. So type checking is really nice because it's going to tell you, hey, you try to set this to a string, but it is not a string. Or I wanted a date, but you gave me a string. Who knows what it is? So this proposal seeks to extend both can define and can observe with type checking. So let me try to find, I feel like there's a final-ish API in here, or like closer to, where it'd be like, so we would probably have like a check type and a convert type. And you could say, so convert type is what happens now. And you could say, hey, the age could be null, undefined, or a number. And you could say check type, maybe number. There's a bunch of different proposals for the language here. But if you want stronger type checking on define maps and can observes, vote for this.
All right. Thank you. Kevin, you're up next to talk about CanJS.com.
Sure. So this is actually a proposal that Chasen put together. So over the last couple months, Chasen's done a bunch of usability studies on CanJS.com and kind of put together a lot of the issues that people have with CanJS.com into this proposal. So a few of these things are like improving the homepage. There's a lot of details in all these issues if you're more interested in finding out a lot more about exactly what this would do. But improving the homepage, improving all the graphics, adding back a comparison to other frameworks page. We used to have this where we would compare CanJS to like Angular and React and Vue and all the other frameworks. There's some issues with navigation and the outline, making the buttons that link you to Gitter and to the forums more accessible. And then a big part of this is SEO. So if you've ever had a problem where you go to Google and you search for CanJS something and you get like the v2.canjs.com homepage, this is definitely an issue that you want to vote for, because we would work on SEO to make sure that if you're looking for CanJS stuff on Google, you would actually get the latest version of CanJS.com. So yeah, if you're interested in the website and improving it, vote for this.
Awesome. Kevin, stay where you are and do, making CanJS core build less than 50K.
Yeah, so this is something that we had on one of our most recent surveys that got a lot of votes. If you're still interested in this, it hasn't changed. We still want to do the same thing. So the basically what we want to do is make can component and its dependencies, when built, minified, and gzipped, less than 50K. Currently, it's like somewhere around 100K, I think, depending on how you measure it. And we want to make it smaller. So there's a lot of stuff in here that we can do to improve the size of the can component, removing redundant code, removing development-only code that is still in production for some reason. Moving some things to plugins is part of this, like some of the stash helpers, maybe the ones that aren't very commonly used. Making events, if you're using events on a component, we remove that to a plugin. A lot of little things that we could do to improve the size of can component. But if you want to be able to use can component with a really small file size, go ahead and vote for this proposal.
I think it was 65K, right, Matthew? It wasn't near 100.
I think it's currently 65K. I think the proposal was get it under.
Yes,
50K.
But it's not near 100. 100 was like a miss.
Oh, there's.
Depends how you. Yeah, it depends how you
do it.
But if you built it, minified, and gzipped.
Yeah, if you build an app, I think it's that. Yeah. We need to. That's part of the proposal, is making sure we know those things.
Yeah, part of that proposal was to figure out a consistent way to measure this and test it and add it to our test so that we don't, go over that threshold once we get under it.
That's right. I'm up next. And so this issue is, no, it's the wrong one. All right. So this proposal is for still. It's about configuration and some of the most common cases where you have to do configuration. A lot of times, a lot of people use the same jQuery widgets like Bootstrap in all their apps, or they use Chai for testing. And they always have to, go in and like copy and paste the configuration from their last project and put it into the current project. So we thought it'd be cool if there was like a package out there which already pre-configured some other popular packages. So instead of, we might call that like still pre-configured. And it's still, instead of having to keep configuring these things over and over again, we just have this repository that people could contribute to, and they wouldn't have to they wouldn't have to do it. So basically, you would just install Steel pre-configured, and then this would kind of automatically configure all of those things for you. That's basically it. That's the proposal. So if you hate configuring Steel, well, we can't get rid of configuration, but we can make it a little bit easier for the common popular libraries. So that is that one. Jess, I'm going to skip to you because I don't want you to have to do like 4 in a row. So if you want to take the next one, I think it's making CanStash more JavaScript-like.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So this one is related to what Kevin talked about, which is scope walking. So we removed scope walking to make room in Stash's expressions and how Stash's logic works for this proposal to make it so that instead of using kind of like how Stash works right now is how with works in JavaScript. I should be a little bit more brief, but this one I think is really important. If you've ever used with an object, then if this object had a foo property, you can just write foo. And this is essentially how Stash works currently. There's a lot of problems with this. Specifically, if foo isn't defined on object, it's not going to throw an error, because if foo could become defined, it would just give undefined. And that's a big problem with Stash. The way that it used to work with scope walking is you really can't throw an error if a value isn't missing. You don't know. It might exist in the future. But like with variable-based scopes, you can actually throw, hey, this variable was never created. You can give a person a warning. There is no foo. You meant food or something like that. And that's super useful and powerful. So this was a big part of the reasoning behind Stash 4.0 to remove scope walking so we could replace it with a better scope walking. This is the new scope walking. The idea is that we would create new helpers. So the old, this is not a breaking change, but we would create new helpers like for that would create variable scope lookup so that you can look up variables here, but then your context would still stay the same. So that this here is still the view model. Right? So this can really make a big difference. I did change I did change one example here. Let me find it to kind of see what even more of a difference is. So, this is in bitballs. It could be really cumbersome to look up to walk back to the view model, even with scope.vm, which is used some places. It can be rather cumbersome to walk all the way up there and call methods. This is, and what is this writing? I don't know. Well, I do, because it's each round, but it's really hard to read. So look at what this would look like with this new for helper. I would say round of these games. I would print the round. And then when I needed the view model, I can just write this dot. And typically, you would always just see a this dot for accessing the view model. So vote for this if you want Stash to be a little bit easier to understand, and it's not a breaking change.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to drop off. So thanks. See you, everybody.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I like the idea that I could know from looking at a template that this always refers to the view model.
Yes.
You don't really have that guarantee because there could still be other helpers that are changing the scope. I wonder if if we could, I don't know how we could do this, but somehow, I don't know, I want to ban all helpers from changing the context.
Yeah, we could. I mean, we could create
have warnings or something. Yeah,
we could create maybe with the same idea where you could turn scope walking on. You could turn off that type of helper in a template, and then in the future, it's kind of like a strict mode.
Yeah.
So, and also part of this, just to give why I think this is so important, is I actually had a user be like, they had a component. I'm not really showing that here, but they had a component where they were just in the component in the getter. It was like this dot games in a component view model or whatever. You're always doing this dot your property, and they found it very confusing why it's not this.games. This would allow you to always have this dot to reference your view model, and then you just have variables. So it would feel to a brand new person who's not familiar to JavaScript, this would feel much more natural.
Yeah, another thing you didn't talk about, but I really think is pretty important, is to be able to use the object curly braces to create objects rather than how we create objects with hashes now, hash expressions. I think that's something that a lot of people find confusing.
That's I don't think that this is part of this proposal. This is part of another one.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Well, forget about that then. Okay, I'll go again. And my proposal is about less, still less. This is something that people have had issues with going back quite a while. When people who are really good at less use a lot of imports in less, and the way that still less works is every time you import a less file from JavaScript, that becomes like its own, that gets translated into its own CSS module. And that can create problems if you're using a lot of imports within less, where you might have some duplication. So what this proposal does, and if you have duplication, that can cause conflicts just because of the way CSS works when it encounters kind of the same selectors. So what this proposal does is it is to, instead of creating a separate CSS module for each time you import a less module, it does it for each bundle. So if it makes sense. So instead of each less import, it's every time a bundle is imported. So a bundle would be like your main bundle, which is the thing that you put in your script tag, or it could be something when you progressively load a bundle. That's a bundle. So it kind of collect all of your less together into one compilation unit and compile that into one CSS module to reduce the amount of conflicts that you might have. So from the sound of it, this would probably be a breaking change, but that's okay. We haven't really broken still less, I don't think, ever in its history, so maybe it's due for one.
We could create it as still less,
it could be
less or something.
Optional somehow, maybe, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, we keep both around. But yeah, that's if you'd like to see that happen in still less, let us know. Back. Stash animation guide. Justin, we cannot hear you.
It's tricky to do certain kinds of animations in Stash. And there's not good documentation on how to do any kinds of animations in Stash. I would like to fix both problems. Essentially, the core idea is to rip off Vue here for the most part, and to automatically add and remove class names based on when elements are being inserted or removed and things like that. You can read more about how it works. Vote for this again if you would like to make it easier to do animations in CanJS.
All right, thank you. You have a couple left. Do you want me to do the event modifier one, or do you want to take it?
I can do that one.
Okay.
These are all my pets, all my babies. Get out of here, Ramya. Just joking. So this is because calling prevent default and stop propagation, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that, like, I don't know. I personally try to keep my view models ignorant of the DOM as much as possible, but this is by far the most common place where the DOM penetrates my view models, is to have to call stop prevent default. So I've wanted to create helpers in the binding syntax somehow that makes it a shorthand so you can just avoid calling prevent default. There's a bunch of different ways I've thought about doing it. Choose this if you'd like us to go down the road of creating one of those shorthands.
All right, thank you. I really like that. I mean, prevent default, like you said, is the most common. So if you could just have that in your template and not have to sully your view model with that stuff, that'd be great. And you're up again. I think this is the last one for the data guide.
So this proposal is for a data guide to walk exhaustively through how to use CanJS's data layer can connect, how each behavior works and how it builds up to something like the supermodel, and odd use cases, things like, oh, I've got two identities or things like that. It would have some there'd be some documentation around more advanced concepts that people could find. So vote for this one if you want an improvement to the data guide. Just as a reminder, because I did create this as part of there is a service layer guide, which is effectively a micro of the data guide. This does exist now, but it is, what I'm proposing is far more in depth than this goes. In some ways, it'd be more of like an advanced data guide, where this is just like, get to know the high level details of how CanJS's data layer works.
All right. Well, I believe, let me make sure that we didn't miss anything. Yeah, that is our survey. We'll be sending it out this afternoon, so be sure to fill it in with all of your favorite things.
Yes, and remember, you can make proposals too, and we will help you advocate for them. If you don't want to be on here advocating for it and want us to do it, we can do that too. Just create an issue and say, like, this, I'd like this to be a proposal, and we're happy to include it and get it voted on. This is your framework too.
All right. All right, and that's it. We'll be back, I believe, next Friday for the next DoneJS Community Hangout. So see you guys then.
Thanks.